Good morning, class. So we come to base camp and we look at our introduction and updates, and we can see that as of Tuesday, March 24, 2020, you should be complete with modules 1 and 3. So that is atmosphere, water cycle, and weather. So let's go ahead and see what we're going to be doing today. So we are going to be completing, scrolling down, module 4. So module 4 is 2 links, wind instruction and wind quiz. So if we click on wind instruction, it's going to take us to the CK12 website. And so it's loading now. So when we go to the CK12 website, you are reading to learn. So we've done these in class before, but you don't have me today behind you nagging, annotate, 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 read, read, read. I know that there's an assumption that we do know when, but guys, it is our worst tested standard. I wish it wasn't, but consistently we struggle with 71.5, which is this global wins. So the good thing that I like about CK12 and I want to show you is if you are using it properly, if you highlight something, you can highlight it, guys. And if you want to unhighlight, I don't know how to do that, but you can highlight using this function, guys. You don't have to simply, so I can delete, delete. So as long as you're logged in up here, and this is free for everyone, you can access these features. In addition to doing things like highlighting text, so let's say I wanted to highlight this because it was important, I can also come here and click add note. And I can write in my own words what I think this means so that as I'm doing or reviewing and going back, I can see my notes on the subject. And I suggest you take a piece of paper and write those notes off to the side because remember, your quizzes are open notes. So anything that you see in here that you don't know or that's new to you, you can definitely, give yourself the resources to succeed. There's 3 questions at the end that you need to know. It's not like, a question. If I were you, I'd even scroll down here and read these questions first so that you know what you're looking for and what's important. Once you're done, I want you to go ahead and click view practice. So it's going to say preview by default. And again, scroll down. That's the key to a lot of life, is just scrolling down. And you are going to practice until your skill level becomes an expert. And you'll just keep going, and eventually it'll pop. Once it says expert, then I feel like you're good enough to go ahead and take the quiz. So the wind quiz kind of builds on a lot of different topics. If you have any troubles with the quiz, please let me know. But before we go ahead and conclude today, I want to go ahead and talk about some misconceptions that I noticed that were happening in our science from our past 2 days. So, weather misconceptions. Give me a second to go ahead and throw this in present mode. And we're just going to make it a little bit loading. So I'm just going to make this a little bit smaller. All right, so misconceptions about weather. So things that you think. So let's start with some vocab. Weather. Whenever you see weather, my Spanish speaker, we're talking about la clima or el clima, no sé qué es, los diferentes, es el, la. Pronouns are not my strong suit, but weather is clima, warm front, cold front, equator. I like that equator translates to Ecuador in Spanish because if you think about Ecuador, it's also kind of tropical, it's a little cheap. And we're still talking about this idea of air pressure. So let's talk about the first misconception. Climate is the same as weather. That is false. These are not words that are interchangeable in science. The truth is that weather and climate are different. So weather is that short amount of time that the weather's taking place. So think about it in terms of seasons. So it might be cold in the winter and it's going to be hot in the summertime, but that doesn't mean that it's always hot or typically in the long term hot or cold in those regions. For example, North Carolina. North Carolina, because I tend to teach weather in the fall, a lot of you write that North Carolina is polar. That's not the case. Most of the time, most of the year, North Carolina is warm, it's tropical, it has really good climates, but just because it's cold outside for one day, that doesn't change what the climate is for a place. Location matters. So if we look here at this photo, so right along this line where it's red is our equator. That's the center of our Earth. It's always tropical. Look at the temperatures here. So anything that falls closer to the equator is going to be tropical. Ecuador is tropical. So you want a vacation in Ecuador because it's hot. You don't want to go up into the North Pole and vacation. So anytime we have any type of land or sea, like, air mass that's closer to the poles, it's going to be polar. Location matters. Equator is hot and our poles are cold. So please keep that in mind as we continue on with our studies. So let's go ahead and look at our next page. So the next thing that I need you guys to understand and know is that, let me just get rid of these eraser, wipe the screen. Come on, buddy. Well, I'm not overly worried about it. You can still see it. So another misconception is that cold air and warm air have the same properties. Again, guys, that is false. So cold air, if we look at it, look at Homer breathing. That cold air is traveling down. Cold air is more dense, so it tends to move down, versus our warm air is lighter, so it tends to move upwards. So if we think about something like a bonfire, that smoke is all going to be pushing upwards, versus if you open up your freezer, and I tried to see if my freezer was cold enough. And Miss Mays is, with the times in terms of like making sure everything's at an ideal temperature, so it didn't work. But if you're somebody who overly chills their freezer, when you open that door, especially like in the summertime, that cold air just falls out. So cold air sinks and warm air rises. So cold air is heavier, warm air is lighter. And the last thing that we're going to talk about or look at is this final slide. So cold fronts versus warm fronts. So there's this misconception happening that, well, Miss Mays, I just can't tell the difference. And if you take your time, you can typically figure out what these different air masses mean, what they are. So let's look at this first air mass. So with this first air mass, have a cold front. So I know it's a cold front because the direction that this front symbol, so we know that our front for our fronts for, okay, our fronts for cold fronts are triangles. So they're triangles. So whatever direction that triangle is facing, the arrow that's the way that it's going. So here we can see that our cold front is traveling to the right because the arrows, the little teeth are pointed to the right. And I know it's a cold front because whatever is in front, so if this is the direction that it's moving, whoever is here in the front, whoever's doing the pushing or the climbing, that's the front that it is. So this is a cold front because cold air is coming up behind that warm air and pushing it up. If it was a warm front, that warm air would be smothering it. So it just takes a minute of looking at the photo and saying to yourself, okay, which direction are the teeth headed? And secondly, who's coming first? If warm air is in front and doing all the work, it's a warm front. If cold air is doing all the work, it's cold front. Remember, cold air is going to travel under because it's a little bit heavier and more dense, and that cold air is always going to come from above, and it's going to typically kind of smother that cold air because it's lighter. So that concludes our misconceptions. Again, today you guys are doing module 4. So module 4, which is wind, you have your instruction on CK12, your quiz, and think about these misconceptions over the coming days. I hope you all have a great, wonderful, fantastic, fantabulous, rainy day.